I spoke Italian to my girlfriend's rude Italian-American family and embarrassed them. So, I've been dating Emma for about 8 months now, and she's amazing. The only problem, her family. They're one of those Italian-American families who never shut up about being Italian, even though none of them have ever been to Italy. And the closest they get to speaking Italian is saying Gracer at Olive Garden. Emma warned me before I met them. She said her dad Marco and her uncle S always do this thing where they throw around random Italian words to seem authentic, especially when they want to intimidate someone or show off. Her mom does it too, but mostly just says Madonna Mia every 5 seconds. The first time I met them was at Sunday dinner at her parents' house in Jersey. I walked in and immediately Marco goes, "Hey, you must be the boyfriend." Come stop. I just smiled and said, "Hi." Because honestly, I had no idea what he said. Then, throughout dinner, they kept dropping these Italian phrases and looking at me like I should be impressed or something. Uncle S kept calling me Razzo, which I'm pretty sure he thought meant tough guy or something. Here's the thing they didn't know. My mom is actually from Milan, like actually from Italy, not Italian-American. She moved here when she was 25, and I grew up speaking both English and Italian at home. I'm completely fluent. But Emma had never heard me speak it, because why would it come up? We live in Boston, not Italy. So anyway, this went on for months. Every family gathering, every dinner, they do their little Italian show, making comments in broken Italian, thinking I couldn't understand. I caught them saying stuff like, which means this guy doesn't understand anything. Real classy. The breaking point was Emma's birthday dinner last month. We're at this nice restaurant, and her whole family is there. Marco starts telling this story about how his grandfather came from Sicily, and he's going on about family honor and tradition. Then he looks right at me and goes, "You Americans, you don't understand La Familia. You don't know what it means to have Italian blood." I just sat there eating my pasta while Uncle S chimed in with, "Si, we Italians, we stick together. We protect each other. Capisce?" He was trying to sound threatening, but honestly, he just sounded like he learned Italian from watching The Godfather. Emma was getting embarrassed and kept apologizing with her eyes. Her cousin Tony started going off about how nobody understands Italian culture anymore and how Americans have no respect for tradition. This whole time, they're throwing around basic words like bay and familia, like they're speaking some ancient secret language. That's when I decided I'd had enough. I put down my fork, looked directly at Marco, and said in perfect Italian, the entire table went dead silent. I mean, you could hear the people at the next table chewing. Marco's face went from confused to red to white in about 3 seconds. But I wasn't done. I kept going. Uncle S was just staring at me with his mouth open. Emma grabbed my hand under the table, but I could tell she was trying not to laugh. Then I really went for it. Point. Emma's mom had stopped saying Madame Mia and was just sitting there looking like she'd seen a ghost. The cousin Tony, who was being so loud about Italian culture, looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Marco finally managed to stutter out, You speak Italian," in English. Which was pretty funny, considering he'd been pretending to speak it all night. I switched back to English and said, "Yeah, fluently. My mom taught me. She's from actual Italy, not just Italian-American. She always told me that if you're going to claim a culture, you should at least learn about it properly." The rest of dinner was painfully quiet. They couldn't do their usual Italian performance because they knew I'd call them out on every mistake. Story. 2. I never thought I'd be writing this, but I need to get this out before I do something I might regret or might not regret. Haven't decided yet. So here's the thing. When I was 15, my older brother Tristan took me into the city. This was back in 2018, and I was this naive kid who still looked up to him, despite all the red flags I should have seen. Tristan was 22 then, already acting like he was some hotshot entrepreneur, even though he was just selling knockoff electronics out of his Honda Accord. He picked me up that December morning and told me he wanted to show me what real life looked like. I said I needed to stop being such a sheltered kid and see how the world actually worked. Our parents had been fighting about money again, and Tristan said he wanted to give me some perspective about what it meant to be successful. We drove into Brooklyn, got burgers at this place near the bridge, and I remember feeling so grown up walking around with him. He was pointing out different buildings, talking about real estate values, acting like he owned the place. Then we walked onto Brooklyn Bridge, and he started this whole speech about how family was everything. But you had to earn your place in it. That's when he said he needed to make a quick call for business. Told me to wait by the rail and look out at the water while he handled something important. I stood there for maybe 20 minutes before I realized something was wrong. Started looking around, calling his name. Nothing. An hour passed, then 2. I checked my pockets and everything was gone. My phone, my wallet, even my winter jacket. Just a note in my jeans pocket that said, "Time to grow up, little brother. Stop being a parasite. Find your own way home." It was December in New York City, and I was standing on a bridge in just a thin sweatshirt with no money and no way to contact anyone. I started walking, but I had no idea where I was going. This homeless guy near the subway entrance saw me shivering and gave me his blanket. Told me the shelters were full, but there was a church about 6 blocks away that might let me wait inside. I spent the night in that church vestibule freezing and trying to figure out what I'd done wrong. The next morning, I managed to borrow a phone from someone and called my mom. But here's the thing. Tristan had already called her, told her I'd thrown some kind of tantrum about not getting money for a video game, stolen his jacket, and run off into the city. Said I was being an ungrateful brat, and he'd tried to reason with me, but I was impossible to deal with. My mom picked me up from the church, and the entire drive home, she kept asking me why I was acting out, why I was lying about what happened, why I couldn't just be grateful that Tristan had tried to do something nice for me. She'd already decided I was the problem before I even got in the car. For months after that, my mom barely spoke to me. She'd make dinner for her and Tristan and leave me to figure out my own food. When family friends asked about me, she'd just say I was going through a difficult phase and needed to learn some responsibility. Tristan would smirk at me across the dinner table and ask if I'd learned anything from my little adventure yet. I spent the rest of high school working part-time jobs to buy my own clothes and food. Graduated early and got out of that house as fast as I could. Went to community college on financial aid. Transferred to a state school. Got my degree in business management. The whole time I was thinking about that bridge. What is that all about, Mr. Crane? About standing there in the cold while my brother drove away laughing. I kept thinking about what I'd do if I ever had the chance to show Tristan what real consequences looked like. Last week, I was in a coffee shop near my apartment when I saw his face on the cover of some business magazine. Local entrepreneur success story, from humble beginnings to real estate empire. The article talked about how Tristan built his property management company from nothing, how he valued family relationships above everything else, how his difficult childhood taught him the importance of loyalty and trust. There was a quote that made me put the magazine down and walk outside. "Family is everything to me. My little brother taught me that when we were kids. He showed me what it meant to depend on people and how important it is to never let the people you love down." I bought the magazine and read the whole article 3 times. Turns out Tristan owns 4 apartment buildings in Brooklyn now, manages properties for other investors, and just bought a house in one of those expensive neighborhoods where everyone has Tesla cars and perfect lawns. The article mentioned his wife Caroline, and their 2 kids talked about how he volunteers at youth programs teaching kids about financial responsibility. The same guy who left me on a bridge to prove a point about parasites is now giving speeches about family values and mentoring teenagers. I found his address online. Public records are amazing when you know how to use them. Drove past his house yesterday, and it's exactly what you'd expect. Big colonial with a circular driveway. Kids' bikes on the front lawn. One of those wooden signs by the door that says the Davidson family established 2019. I've been sitting in my car outside his house for about an hour now, trying to decide exactly how I want to handle this. Part of me wants to just walk up to the front door and see what happens when he realizes his little brother isn't that scared 15-year-old anymore. Part of me wants to wait until he's alone so we can have a real conversation about what family loyalty actually means. But the biggest part of me wants to see how much he values that perfect family reputation when people find out what kind of person he really is. I know some of you are going to say, I should just let this go, that it was 7 years ago and people change. But here's the thing. I don't think Tristan has changed at all. I think he's just gotten better at hiding who he really is. And I spent 7 years getting stronger, smarter, and more successful specifically, so I could be ready for this moment. So, here I am sitting outside his house at 9 Bam on a Tuesday, watching him through his living room window as he plays with his kids. Caroline is making dinner in the kitchen. Everything looks so normal and happy from out here. I wonder what they'd think if they knew Daddy once abandoned his teenage brother on a bridge in December just to teach him a lesson about being grateful. Guess we're about to find out. Update 1. Well, I did it. And honestly, it went nothing like I expected, but somehow exactly like it needed to. So there I was sitting in my car outside Tristan's house, watching him through the window with his perfect little family. I kept thinking about that magazine article about how he's built this whole image around being a family man who learned everything from his difficult childhood. The hypocrisy was eating at me, but I also kept thinking about what I actually wanted to accomplish here. I finally got out of the car around 9:30, walked right up to his front door, and rang the bell. Caroline answered, and I could see the confusion on her face. I told her I was David, Tristan's brother, and asked if he was home. She got this weird look and said she didn't know Tristan had a brother, which honestly should have been my first clue about how deep his revisionist history went. She called for him, and when Tristan came to the door, I watched his face go through about 5 different emotions in 3 seconds. He stepped outside and closed the door behind him, which was smart because what followed was probably the most honest conversation we'd ever had. Tristan started off trying to act like nothing had happened, said it was great to see me, asked how I'd been, mentioned that he'd tried to find me over the years, but I'd moved around so much, the whole fake concerned brother routine. But when I brought up Brooklyn Bridge, when I mentioned that December night 7 years ago, his whole demeanor shifted. He told me I was being dramatic about what happened, that it was a life lesson, not abandonment, that he was trying to teach me about responsibility and self-reliance because our parents were babying me too much, and I needed to understand that the world wasn't going to hand me anything. He said sometimes tough love was the only way to get through to someone who wasn't listening to reason. I asked him if leaving a 15-year-old with no money, no phone, and no jacket on a bridge in December was really tough love or just cruelty. He said I was exaggerating what happened, that I had enough resources to figure it out, that I was being overly sensitive about what was meant to be a character-building experience. That's when I realized something important. Tristan actually believed his own story. He'd told this version to himself so many times that he'd convinced himself it was true. He genuinely thought he'd done me a favor that night. I reminded him about the note he left in my pocket, about how he told our mom I was an ungrateful brat who threw a tantrum and ran off, about how she barely spoke to me for months because she believed his version of events. His face changed when I brought up the lies he told Mom. Tristan got defensive and said he never meant for it to go that far, that he was just trying to avoid getting in trouble himself, because she would have been furious if she knew he'd left me in the city. He said he panicked and made up the story about me running off, but he figured it would blow over in a few days, and we'd all laugh about it later. I asked him why he never corrected the story when it didn't blow over, why he let me spend months being treated like the problem child when he knew exactly what had really happened. Why? He watched me work part-time jobs through high school to buy my own food and clothes, rather than admit he'd abandoned me and lied about it. This is where Tristan's justifications got really twisted. He said he didn't realize how seriously Mom was taking it at first, that by the time he understood how bad things had gotten between me and her, too much time had passed to admit he'd lied without making everything worse. He said he thought about telling the truth multiple times, but it would have destroyed the family dynamics even more than they already were. I told him he let me get treated like a burden in my own home, and said nothing. That he built his whole success story on family values, while he knew he'd destroyed mine. That every time he gave an interview, or spoke at those youth programs about the importance of family loyalty, he knew he was lying. Caroline opened the door at some point during this conversation. I think our voices had gotten louder than either of us realized, and she probably heard more than either of us wanted her to. She asked if everything was okay, and Tristan told her we were just catching up on old times, working through some childhood memories, but I could see the wheels turning in her head. She'd heard enough to know this wasn't a normal family reunion, and she was smart enough to pick up on the tension between what Tristan was saying and what I was saying. I looked at both of them standing there. Him trying to manage the situation, and her trying to figure out what she'd walked into. And I made a decision. I told Caroline that her husband once left his teenage brother on Brooklyn Bridge in December, with no money and no way home. then convinced their mother it was my fault when I nearly froze to death. I told her about the magazine article and asked if she thought someone who abandons family members and lies about it should really be giving interviews about family values. Tristan immediately went into damage control mode, told Caroline I was confused about what happened, that there had been a misunderstanding years ago that we'd already worked through as adults, said I was going through some kind of personal crisis and taking it out on him, that I'd always been prone to exaggerating situations when I didn't get my way. But Caroline wasn't buying it. She looked at me and asked me to tell her exactly what happened that night. So I did. Everything. The fake business call, waking up alone on the bridge, the homeless man who gave me his blanket, spending the night in the church vestibule, the lies Tristan told our mother, the months of being treated like a problem child. She listened to the whole thing. Then looked at Tristan and asked if it was true. He tried to explain that it was complicated, that I was leaving out important context about the family situation at the time, that he was young and made mistakes, but learned from them and became a better person. Caroline asked him directly if he had left me on a bridge with no money and no way home when I was 15. Tristan said yes, but that it wasn't as simple as I was making it sound. She asked if he had lied to our mother about what happened. He said yes, but that he was trying to protect the family from more conflict. Caroline went back inside without saying another word to either of us. Tristan and I stood there on his front porch, and for the first time in 7 years, he wasn't in control of the narrative. He asked what I wanted from him, if I was here for money, an apology, or just to cause problems in his marriage and family life. I told him I wanted him to understand that actions have consequences even 7 years later. That building a reputation on family values while knowing you've destroyed someone. Elsa's family relationships makes you a hypocrite. That lying about who you are doesn't make the truth go away. It just means you're living a fake life. He said I was being vindictive, and that what happened when we were kids shouldn't define either of us as adults. I told him he was right. It shouldn't, but he was the one who made it define our relationship by never acknowledging what he did or trying to make it right. I walked back to my car and drove home. But guys, I'm not done with this conversation, because Caroline deserves to know who she married, and those kids deserve to understand what their father is capable of when family becomes inconvenient, not because I want to destroy their family, but because truth matters. The magazine interview was just the beginning. Tristan has built his whole public reputation on being a family man with strong values, and people should know the real story before they trust him with their families and their money. Update 2. Things have escalated in ways I didn't expect. And honestly, I'm not sure if I should feel vindicated or concerned about what I've set in motion. 2 days after my confrontation with Tristan, Caroline reached out to me through Instagram. She found my profile because I was tagged in some old photos from high school that were still on our mutual friends accounts. She sent me a direct message asking if we could talk, saying she had questions about what I told her and needed to understand the full situation. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and what she told me completely changed how I understood Tristan's current life. Turns out the perfect family image he's been projecting isn't as solid as that magazine article made it seem. Caroline started by asking me to walk her through the Brooklyn Bridge incident again. But this time she wanted specific details. What time of day it happened, what the weather was like, exactly what Tristan said when he left me there. She was taking notes on her phone, which seemed weird until she explained why. She said that after I left their house, she and Tristan had a massive fight. He kept insisting that I was exaggerating what happened, that I was a troubled kid who had always caused problems for the family, and that I was probably having some kind of mental health crisis now. But something about his story didn't add up for her. Caroline told me she'd started noticing things about Tristan over the past year that bothered her. How he talked about people who struggled financially, how he dismissed homeless people as lazy or weak, how he reacted when their kids made mistakes. She said he had this pattern of justifying harsh treatment by calling it life lessons or character building. But here's what really got to me. Caroline said that Tristan had been telling people at his company and in their neighborhood that he didn't have any family left, that his parents had died when he was young, and he'd built his success entirely on his own. She'd never questioned it because he seemed uncomfortable talking about his past, and she figured it was traumatic for him. Learning that he had a living brother who he'd never mentioned and that this brother had a story about being abandoned made her realize that Tristan had been lying about his entire background. She started wondering what else he'd been dishonest about. This is where things got really interesting. Caroline told me that Tristan's business success wasn't exactly what the magazine article made it seem. He manages properties for other investors, but he doesn't actually own much himself. Most of his income comes from management fees and commissions, and they're constantly struggling to maintain the lifestyle they project. She said they bought the house they're living in because Tristan insisted they needed to look successful to attract better clients. But they're stretched thin financially. The perfect family image is basically a marketing strategy for his business. Caroline asked me about our parents, whether they were really dead like Tristan claimed. I told her they were very much alive, just that we'd all become estranged after the Brooklyn Bridge incident and the lies that followed. She asked if I thought they'd be willing to talk to her. I gave her my mom's phone number. That evening, Caroline called my mom. I wasn't part of that conversation, but my mom called me afterward, and she was furious. Not at Caroline, but at Tristan. She'd never heard Caroline's name before. Didn't know Tristan was married. Didn't know she had grandchildren. My mom told Caroline the truth about what happened that December night 7 years ago. About how Tristan had convinced her that I was lying and manipulative. How she'd believed his version of events for months, and how by the time she realized something was wrong, I'd already moved out and cut contact with the family. She also told Caroline about the years since then. How Tristan would call her maybe twice a year, always when he needed something, usually money. How he'd told her I was doing well, but didn't want contact with the family because I was still angry about childhood disagreements. How she'd been sending birthday cards to an address that apparently doesn't exist because he'd been intercepting them. Caroline called me the next morning and told me about her conversation with my mom. She was crying when she asked me if I realized that Tristan had been keeping our entire family apart for 7 years by lying to everyone involved. I told her I suspected something like that, but hearing it confirmed was still devastating. My mom and I had both been waiting for the other person to reach out, not knowing that Tristan was actively preventing any communication between us. Caroline said she was going to confront Tristan with everything she'd learned, and she wanted to know if I'd be willing to be part of that conversation. She said she needed him to explain himself with both of us there, so he couldn't manipulate the story differently for each of us. I agreed to meet them at their house last night. When I got there, Tristan was waiting in the living room, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. Caroline had obviously told him what she'd discovered because he started talking before I even sat down. He said he could explain everything, that the situation was more complicated than it looked, and that he'd made mistakes, but had good reasons for the choices he made. He said he'd been trying to protect everyone involved by keeping us separated because our family had always been dysfunctional, and bringing us back together would just create more problems. Caroline asked him directly why he'd told her his parents were dead. He said it was easier than explaining the complicated family dynamics, and he figured it didn't matter since he wasn't in contact with them anyway. She asked him why he'd been intercepting communications between me and our mom. He said he was trying to give everyone space to heal without reopening old wounds. Then she asked him about the money he'd been borrowing from our mom over the years. This was news to me, but apparently he'd been telling my mom that he was successful, but occasionally needed short-term loans for business investments. Money he'd never paid back. Tristan's explanations got weaker and more defensive as the conversation went on. He kept saying that we were all better off without the family drama, that he was protecting his wife and children from dysfunction, and that bringing the past up now was just going to hurt everyone involved. But Caroline wasn't having it. She told him that lying about having no family while borrowing money from his mother wasn't protection. It was manipulation. That telling his business associates he was a self-made man when he was actually receiving financial help was fraud. That keeping a brother and mother apart for 7 years wasn't healing. It was control. The conversation ended with Caroline telling Tristan that she needed time to think about their marriage and what kind of person she'd actually married. She said she was going to stay at her sister's house with the kids for a few days while she figured out what to do next. I left after that, but guys, I keep thinking about those kids. They have a grandmother they've never met and an uncle they didn't know existed because their father decided our family wasn't good enough for his image. The truth is finally out. But now I'm wondering if I've destroyed more than just Tristan's reputation. Caroline and those kids didn't deserve to have their world turned upside down because of something that happened 7 years ago. But then I remember that magazine article and I think about all the people who trust Tristan with their money and their properties based on his claims about family values and personal integrity. They deserve to know who they're really dealing with. Final update. It's been 3 weeks since everything came out, and I'm finally ready to tell you how this all ended. Some of you have been messaging me asking for updates, and honestly, the resolution was more satisfying than any revenge I could have planned. After Caroline left with the kids, Tristan tried to damage control in the worst possible way. He started calling everyone in our family and his business network, trying to get ahead of the story before it spread. But instead of being honest, he doubled down on the lies and made everything so much worse. He called my mom first and told her that Caroline was having a mental breakdown and making up stories about him, said that I had manipulated her during our coffee shop meeting, and convinced her to believe false memories about our childhood. He actually used the phrase family dysfunction to describe me reaching out to Caroline like I was the problem for telling the truth. My mom shut that down immediately. She told him she'd already spoken to Caroline extensively, that Caroline had asked detailed questions that proved she wasn't making anything up, and that she was ashamed of herself for believing his lies about me for so many years. She said she wanted to meet her grandchildren, and that if he tried to prevent that, she'd make sure everyone in their community knew exactly what kind of person he was. But here's where Tristan really screwed himself. He decided to call some of his business associates and clients, trying to preemptively explain why his family situation might seem complicated if anyone asked questions. He told them that he had a troubled brother who was spreading false stories about him, and that anyone who contacted them should know I was unreliable and possibly dealing with substance abuse issues. This backfired spectacularly because Caroline had already reached out to several people in their social circle. She'd been asking neighbors and friends if they'd ever heard Tristan. Mentioned having family because she was trying to understand how extensive his lies were. When these same people then got calls from Tristan warning them about his troubled brother, they started putting pieces together. One of Tristan's biggest clients, a guy named Austin, who owns multiple rental properties that Tristan manages, called Caroline directly. He said he was concerned about Tristan's judgment and honesty and wanted to hear her side of the story before deciding whether to continue their business relationship. Caroline told him everything about the Brooklyn Bridge incident, about Tristan claiming his parents were dead while borrowing money from our mom, about him intercepting communications between family members for years. She also mentioned the financial pressure they'd been under, trying to maintain an image that was beyond their means. Austin did his own research after that conversation. He called the magazine that had featured Tristan and told them he had information that contradicted their article about family values and self-made success. He also reached out to other property owners in the area and shared what he'd learned. The magazine editor called Caroline to verify the information Austin had provided. Caroline confirmed everything and offered to put them in touch with my mom for additional verification. The editor said they were considering a follow-up article about the importance of fact-checking success stories, and that they were embarrassed about not verifying Tristan's claims about his background. Within a week, Tristan lost 3 major clients. Austin pulled all his properties from Tristan's management immediately. 2 other investors did the same after they spoke with Austin and did their own background checks. Tristan's property management business basically collapsed because his entire reputation was built on being trustworthy and family-oriented. People who invest in real estate don't want to work with someone who lies about fundamental things like whether his parents are alive. The youth program where Tristan had been volunteering also asked him to step back. Apparently, parents started questioning whether someone who abandons family members should be mentoring their kids about responsibility and character. The program director called Caroline to understand the situation better. And after hearing the full story, they decided they couldn't have someone representing their organization who had such a documented pattern of dishonesty. Caroline filed for divorce 2 weeks ago. She's living with her sister Angelina and the kids, and she's been bringing them to visit my mom regularly. My mom is over the moon about finally meeting her grandchildren, and they're getting to know their uncle David, who they never knew existed. I went with Caroline and the kids to visit my mom last Saturday, and it was the most normal family interaction I've had in 7 years. The kids, who are 6 and 4, were fascinated by hearing stories about their dad as a kid. My mom showed them photo albums that included pictures of me and Tristan growing up together. The 4-year-old asked why Daddy never brought them to see Grandma before. Caroline explained that sometimes adults make mistakes and don't communicate well with their families, but that they were working on fixing that now. She's been incredibly thoughtful about not bad-mouthing Tristan to the kids while still being honest about why their family situation has changed. My mom pulled me aside during that visit and apologized for believing Tristan's lies about me for so many years. She said she should have known something was wrong when I suddenly stopped calling and visiting, that it wasn't like me to just disappear from the family. She said she'd been too proud to reach out because she thought I was angry at her, and that she regretted not fighting harder to understand what had really happened. We talked for hours about the years we'd lost and how different things might have been if we'd been able to communicate directly instead of through Tristan's manipulation. She said she'd always felt like something was missing from the family after I left, but she'd convinced herself that some families just naturally grow apart. Caroline told me during that same visit that she'd found more lies as she'd gone through their finances and paperwork. Tristan had been telling their insurance company that he had no living relatives, which affected their policy terms. He'd also been claiming on business applications that he was an only child with deceased parents, which had helped him qualify for certain small business programs designed for people without family support systems. Tristan tried to reach out to me directly last week. He called from a number I didn't recognize and said he wanted to talk about fixing our family's situation. When I answered, he told me that my actions had destroyed his marriage and his business, and that I needed to help him explain to people that this was all a misunderstanding. I told him that there was no misunderstanding, that he'd made choices for 7 years to keep our family separated through lies, and now he was facing the natural consequences of those choices. That people weren't rejecting him because I manipulated them, but because they finally knew who he really was. He said I was being vindictive, and that revenge wasn't going to make either of us happy. I told him this wasn't revenge. It was accountability. That every relationship he'd lost and every opportunity that disappeared happened because people learned the truth about his character and decided they didn't want to associate with him. He asked what it would take for me to help him rebuild his reputation. I told him that his reputation was his own responsibility and always had been. That if he'd spent the last 7 years being honest, instead of constructing elaborate lies, he wouldn't be in this situation. The conversation got heated when he started blaming me for ruining his children's lives. He said that Caroline and the kids would suffer financially because of what I'd done, and that I should care more about their well-being than about getting back at him. I pointed out that Caroline and the kids were suffering because they'd been living a lie, not because the truth came out. That they deserved to know their real family and understand their actual situation instead of being props in his fake success story. That he was the one who'd put them in a vulnerable position by building their entire life on dishonesty. He said I was destroying the family, and I told him that he'd destroyed our family years ago when he left me on that bridge. I was just finally in a position to stop him from pretending otherwise. The conversation ended with him saying that I'd regret this when I saw how it affected everyone else. I told him that the only thing I regretted was waiting 7 years to stop protecting his secrets. Here's what I realized through all of this. The revenge I'd been planning for 7 years was never necessary. Tristan had been building his own downfall the entire time by creating a life based on lies. All I had to do was tell the truth and let people make their own decisions about what kind of person they wanted in their lives. His business failed because clients couldn't trust someone who lies about basic facts. His marriage ended because Caroline couldn't stay with someone who'd been manipulating her understanding of reality for years. His reputation crumbled because the community values he claimed to represent were completely contradicted by his actual behavior. The most satisfying part wasn't seeing him lose everything. It was watching my mom meet her grandchildren for the first time. Seeing Caroline understand that she deserved better than a relationship built on lies, and realizing that our family could actually function when people were honest with each other. I'm having dinner with my mom and Caroline and the kids this Sunday. It'll be the first time our family has been together in 7 years. Except this time, it'll be the family that actually matters. The people who choose to be honest with each other and support each other instead of controlling and manipulating each other. Caroline said she's been explaining to the kids that families sometimes go through changes, but that the important thing is that people who love each other find their way back to each other. She's planning to help them write letters to their grandma so they can stay in touch between visits. Tristan texted me yesterday asking if he could come to dinner too. I didn't respond, but I did forward the message to Caroline. She said she's not ready to have him around the kids when she can't trust what he might tell them about the situation. Sometimes the best revenge is just refusing to keep someone else's secrets for them. Everything that happened to Tristan was a direct result of people learning who he actually was instead of who he pretended to be. And honestly, that feels more satisfying than any elaborate scheme I could have planned. The truth really does have a way of catching up with people. It just took 7 years in this case. But now that it's out, I finally feel like I can stop carrying the weight of his lies and just focus on building the honest relationships I should have had all along.